Welcome to All Creatures Podcast. This is Chris. Okay, for the audience, this is the show we have been waiting for 8 years. Since we started our podcast and covered over 300 species, going into the evolutionary history of these animals, I would always bring up one of these fantastical species related to a current species. Literally just 2 weeks ago, we were doing the story of the green sea turtle and their fantastic comeback. And I was talking about the giant freshwater sea turtles. And again, Angie said, Chris, somebody needs to make this show. Somebody needs to go and create these animals over the many years we've covered this podcast. And I'm going to tell you, a lot of those animals are in this series. I am joined with Mike Gunton, executive producer of Prehistoric Planet Ice Age. Mike, first, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you very much. Lovely to be here. Sounds exciting already. I'm loving it.
We literally, I have every episode, I was like, no way they put that in there. I mean, not just the elephant bird and the moa, and here I am in New Zealand, and we love our moa, extinct, but you know, the legacy of the moa still lives on. But I mean, when you look at it, it's not just mammoths and saber-toothed cats that you've seen in other Ice Age shows. The short-faced kangaroo, the giant ape, the dwarf elephant. I mean, I could go on and on. I've got a list of animals. Wow. Like, to see them on the screen, incredible. So to kick this off, my first question is, the previous two installments of Prehistoric Planet have been jaw-dropping with the bringing these creatures to life, the dinosaurs. What's the big shift to the Ice Age? What was that decision like, or that decision tree like, hey, we need to go and capture some of these most incredible animals that no one's probably even heard of before?
Well, you've kind of half answered already by saying they are extraordinary creatures. I mean, I think it's probably worth going back to when I kind of came up with the idea of doing this, which was actually sitting on a mountainside on the equator in Kenya with David Attenborough, and we were introducing a show, and he was talking about the lines were, nowhere on earth does nature put on a greater show than here on the plains of Africa, and it was absolutely true, and that was the story. Then as I was sitting, we were wrapping up and thinking about it, and I was thinking, well, that hasn't, there are other times when that's also been true. Imagine if we could get all the guys and gals around me, this crew, stick them in the time machine and fly them back to those times and make a Planet Earth type show, but in that time period. And of course, the obvious thing that came to me was, well, end of the last age of the dinosaurs, end of the Cretaceous, when you had all the superstars, the T-Rexes and the like. And so I started mulling that over and thinking, well, is this possible? Technically, could we, was the technology good enough to actually really deliver not a VFX show, but a show that felt like it really was a natural history show? And it took a few years, many years actually, thinking about it and getting the right people involved. And eventually I met up with Jay Hunt, who from Apple TV Plus, and or Apple TV as we now call it. She loved the idea, and then between us, we reckoned we could do this. So I went to see the various companies, and we decided, yes, the time was right. So that's what we did. We did 2 series, incredibly successful. People loved it. They felt that they were getting a completely different prehistoric experience, because it felt like they were in a prehistoric planet universe where these creatures really were living, and they had relationships, and they had behavioral struggles. It wasn't just a kind of a rogues gallery of creatures. Anyway, that, as I say, that was a success. And whilst that was going on, I was thinking, well, look, if the audience like this, and we're going to get, people want more of this, where next? And I thought, well, the other time that is extraordinary is when the Earth was in this remarkable period of turmoil, as the climate was swishing around all over the place, and some of the coldest of temperatures for millions and millions and millions of years, the Ice Age, or I should say the Ice Ages, but actually, which is why we actually call the series Ice Age rather than the Ice Age. And so that was the idea. But then, of course, the same question came in my mind: can we pull this off technically? Because there's one thing making a dinosaur, incredibly difficult, but it's another whole bag of beans making mammals, because we are very sensitive about what mammals look like. We are one. We live with them, cats, dogs, and the rest of it. And also, that's hard. They also have fur. A lot of them very dense fur, millions of individual filaments, all of whom are behaving independently, an insane amount of computing power. Can we pull that off? That's very, very hard. And then the third thing is, and we're of course in the ice age, so they're going to be running, jumping around in snow drifts, and there's going to be ice, and there's going to be occasionally they might jump into a tar pit or into a mud pool. Very, 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 very hard. Again, long conversations with VFX people, and we said, yes, actually, the time is right. 5 years ago, wouldn't have done it. Couldn't have done it. Well, we couldn't have done it to my satisfaction, but we could for this, and that's where we are. That's why we're here.
Well, you do bring them to life. I mean, I get giant wombat. That's something like I've been dying to, even seeing wombats in Australia is hard to see, but seeing the giant wombat on the screen, and it is so again, incredible filmmaking. If people had not seen Prehistoric Planet, because what I'd like to ask you is, all the different ecosystems that you went around the planet, the challenges of the ice and the ice age, over millions of years, but then the deserts and how many different countries did you travel to?
Well, first, I think you make a good point. It's a very, very important part. And actually, one of the, embarrassed to say, one of the surprises to me when we actually got into this was, it's all very well. I was sitting there thinking, Ice Age, it'll be, the signature, it's going to be snowy, icy, it's going to be frozen north, all the classic animals. But then, of course, as soon as you start going into it, you realize, well, the consequences of the Ice Age and that freezing were global. And actually, when you flip down to the south, all this extraordinary change in habitats, growing deserts, forests retreating, whole new habitats, grasslands, suddenly becoming a dominant botanical force on the earth. That was a story. Those were stories I hadn't really even thought about. But of course, they're fantastically exciting, and they are the things that effectively catalyze or establish the legacy of those. I should say is what is the world we live in today. So. And with that, of course, comes another whole cast of characters. You've mentioned some of them, those huge, great herds of giant wombats, giant short-faced kangaroos, which are so big they can't even hop. And one of the trickiest ones of all was Thylacoleo. We know I'd heard of course, of the marsupial lion, and like probably most people thought, well, it's going to look like a lion with a pouch. Of course, it looks nothing like a lion. It's basically a sort of slightly crazy carnivorous koala bear. That in reconstruction terms, building that creature, I would say, is probably the trickiest thing we had to do, because it doesn't make sense. But when you watch most of the other creatures, one of the things that I hope I bring to it as well is that there's all the paleontological sort of hard data, hard evidence, but some of it comes to it. Some of what I bring to it is the kind of feel. I watch animals a lot. What looks right? How do they behave? How does Mother Nature generally do these kind of things? I have absolutely no idea what a carnivorous kangaroo would do or look like. And to be honest, I think even our paleontological experts were also kind of scratching their head. But now, having said that, of course, what you do, and this is one of how we work, is it's all about deduction. You start to build the thing. You don't just go, oh, it must look like that. This piece of evidence, this piece of evidence, this piece of evidence. It's a bit like, it's quite Sherlock Holmesian in that you have like reconstructing an event that, like a forensic event. Well, we know this, we know this, and we know this, and we know it can't be that, and it can't be that, and it can't be that. Ergo, it must be this. So that's how you end up with these slightly more unusual things and coming up with the reconstruction that we've eventually gone with. And I think, even though it still looks to me a bit, really, for the scientific community, I think they're saying, yeah, it is a bit odd, but that's what they were like.
They're all odd. Yeah, I mean, you look at them all, and
Yes.
the marsupial lion, and that one, I had not known about it before. I don't know if I came across it in the literature somewhere, but it did. I could see I would say the resemblance, but the behavior, the movement of a koala.
Yeah,
and
well, I mean that it is effectively that it's this is one of the things about the the science of this, body types and how they behave, there's some little groups of type. And so when one of the things that's been very interesting working with the scientists is sometimes we ask questions of them that they haven't thought about, because why would they? They're thinking about other elements of the paleontological world. But we're really interested in behavior. How do these animals do things? And that, of course, a lot of that does come down to the physical nature, the physiology and the anatomy of the creatures. So sometimes asking them the things, well, how would they have brought down their prey? How would they have run? How would they have just generally behaved? Those questions start to ask the academic community to think about it, and they then ask us questions. Well, look, you've built the model, and it's accurate skeletally, it's accurate in terms of the muscle positions and how the muscles fire. So if it did this, what would it look like? So you plug that into the model, and it behaves, and they go, gosh, yeah, that makes sense. So it's a lovely virtuous circle, which in fact, in the first couple of series, out of these sorts of conversations, actually academic literature was produced. So I think we're humble filmmakers, feel quite proud that we've at least catalyzed contribution to the academic world.
No, there's a lot of science in this. There
has to be. It has to be. It's all based on the science.
Yeah, and being a science nerd, and we always teach form to function. So when I was teaching basic anatomy in animals, it's it has this physiology to do these things. So that does come across. It absolutely does come across.
That's why people like yourself who come from an academic background can see the kind of thought process and the what's the word, the route map that we've taken. Now, we also, of course, bring that there's an art in this as well. There has to be. There is, and there's an emotion about it, because one of the things that I think I've said at the beginning is, I want people to feel like this is an experience. Of course, deep learning, and we can maybe talk about that later, is a really important part of that, but it's also an entertaining experience. What would it have been like? How would these animals have behaved? And to get that, you have to put yourself inside the heads of the animals. You have to look at them as individuals with individual struggles. Now, I think that's the most acute, the most immediate way of understanding nature, understanding biology, understanding what's going on in the natural world, through seeing it through the eyes of an individual's animal's lives, and what's at stake. What's the life and death decisions it's making. So that's a big part of the approach and the execution.
Well, yeah, I mean, the one sequence, Gigantopithecus, the giant orangutan type ape, they think, and I did bring that animal up a few times in the podcast over the years, and to see him walk out on stage and wherever you film that, because people to understand, if you haven't seen Prehistoric Planet, they go out and they film the landscapes, and then the animals come alive within live footage or real footage of, say, New Zealand with the moa. But did you, one of the things was the tool use, and I was like, wow. Okay, did you take some inspiration from what we know with chimpanzees and other great apes to kind of, how would this ape survive? Oh, it was like a mini King Kong. It was amazing.
Well, that animal was another one that we talked long and hard about about what it would look like, how it would behave, and also what kind of story we would frame. Because it isn't, again, people have watched the shows. These are the animals do their thing, they do their behavior, but they're often doing it in a very specific situation. So you understand about the sort of the generic types of behavior this type of creature could do, but you see it applied in a very specific moment, which I think, again, is much more entertaining, much more insightful, much more memorable. And so the reason why Gigantopithecus was in the show, other than the fact that it's an incredibly cool animal, was it was emblematic of the challenges that were happening in these forested areas during this period. One of the consequences was, as the water was removed from the environments. I mean, I'm doing this as a very simplistic way of describing it, but you take water out of the environment, and what was happening in the forest was was retreating and being replaced by grasslands, and you were getting these kind of little isolated pockets of forest which animals would survive in. But as we know, there's a certain limit to if these pockets get too small. And there's lots of implications about what's happening in the world today from this, but another thing to talk about maybe. But so the story really was that this was a creature that was a loser, so to speak, in what was happening in the Ice Age. Its world was disappearing. So yes, we were seeing it going about its ordinary life, and some of the things it could do was, we think it was a fruit eater, but it would always also be able to supplement its diet from protein on the ground. So yes, it could, in our story, it could survive by fishing for ants or termites, ants in this particular case, and it again allowed you to look at the extraordinary dexterity of apes, which is one of the characteristics, and all the rest of it. So you see that behavior, but you're getting to know that this animal has got this great brain. It can come up with solutions to the problem it's facing of its forest disappearing. But ultimately, even that isn't going to be enough. And I think it's a very, he does eventually find some fruit. Great, he succeeded. But the big problem he's got is that, as these are social animals, and they're looking for friends and mates and the like. Calls and calls and calls, and there's no response because their numbers are declining. And of course, that's what happens in these type of animals with a very slow reproductive turnover. It doesn't take, they can collapse quickly. So again, there's levels and levels and levels of biological story in here, not overtly stated, but but you get it and you understand it. And I think it's incredibly moving. He sits down there with his fruit and just calls, and then there's nothing, and you can just see the expression on his face and thinking, well, what am I going to do? So
yeah, and there was I was in the 80s. I think it was a video. It was the last call of it's a Hawaiian bird.
So there was a Silent Spring, kind of. Was it that one?
Yeah. I think so.
Silent Spring, yeah.
Yeah,
it's similar.
The birds singing, and there's no answer, and it's just like, oh, it just brings tears to your eyes.
It does, yeah.
What's saying
Good.
that?
I like it when it brings tears to your eyes.
Yes.
Well, it's worked.
The overarching theme is not just the struggles that we know these animals go through, right? We know they're searching for food, not trying to get preyed upon, or if they're a predator. Plenty of predators in this series. With the giant fossa, that was awesome. Trying to survive, trying to feed their young,
and not always succeeding.
No, but I felt the overarching theme of it was how the environment was changing and how it drove them to extinction. Now, it gave rise, opened up space for other species to thrive, as the mammoth went away, the African and Asian elephants, got to take that niche. But I couldn't help but go back and go, okay, what are we seeing today in the world, as you know? And I failed to mention, because I did want to ask you, Mike, about, your experiences with this film and Planet Earth 2, Planet Earth 3, all the nature documentaries you've been involved in. But is that kind of like the overarching theme of this? But you're just telling the story that over these, long periods.
I think that it was not the aim of making this. This was very much, as I say, part of that Prehistoric Planet universe or franchise tenet, which is to make a planet Earth to show people things they can never see with their own eyes, and in a wonderful time in the world's history, and look at these extraordinary creatures, and look at the just how extraordinary nature is. But because of because of the peculiarities of what was going on in this world, and how the change in climatic conditions was so rapid and so extreme, and the consequences of that's exciting and dramatic and thought-provoking in one way, but it's also implicitly, and this was never an explicit aim. Implicitly, you cannot help but think to yourself, okay, extinction as a result of this, loss of habitat, change of habitat, whatever it is, that is something we're aware of today, and speed of change. These in geological terms, these environmental changes. It was a roller coaster as well. It was back and forth, back and forth. People say, well, climate's always done that, but these were fast in geological terms. But we're still talking about millennia for these things to happen, and for animals to be able to adapt and move. And we're now talking, of course, about things happening in a decade or decades. So again, not an explicit message. There's no messaging in this. It's just if you're an interested and thought-provoking person, you're going to see some connections, and it makes you it just makes you think, which is always a good outcome.
I can't scream enough from the top of the mountain going, you must watch this film, because you again, you see part of the planet that it just sparks the imagination, especially in young children. And I'm going to make my children watch it when it airs in a couple of weeks, because it's just incredible. It's just so good. I was like gushing about it. I couldn't wait to speak with you. How did you go down, like, which species to cover? Because when I saw the dwarf elephant, I just was like, okay, come on. Like, you picked out all the ones I had talked about for years. I was like, oh, it'd be so cool to see these in the wild, or, and then there it is on the screen.
It's, you mentioned about Planet Earth and that type of show. It's actually in some ways a very similar kind of starting point. Inevitably you have a bit of a blank sheet of paper. Now, in Planet Earth, that blank sheet of paper can include hundreds and thousands of species. We don't have quite such a range of characters for this, because of just the evidence we have. But in the same way with Planet Earth, you're thinking, so, well, look, what sort of, how are we going to cast this? And also, how are we going to, what stories? We want funny stories, we want sad stories, we want predation stories, we want scary stories, we want courtship stories, we want all those kind of things, in this sort of matrix of mix. But also you want animal types. And, if somebody says to you, oh, by the way, there's an elephant, well, it's not actually related to a thing that looks like an elephant. I mean, to me, it's an elephant, but, strictly, it's not actually an elephant, but very similar. So somebody says to you, there's an elephant. The adult is only 3 feet tall, and its baby's the size of a Yorkshire Terrier. Do you want to have that character in your show? I'd be saying, yes.
Yes.
It's a no-brainer. It's an incredible creature. It pushes all the right buttons. It's fascinating, it's strange, and it's cute. And those are things you don't say no to. And what was really nice about this story was how we were, it had to be in, obviously. And also it's a fantastic emblem of dwarfism, which was this island dwarfism, and these islands as a consequence of sea level rise and all the rest of it. Fascinating science behind that too. But it's an interesting sort of window into how these stories evolve. So we were going to tell a story about that. But what happened is, as we were doing the research, one of our team discovered that there is these giant, effectively, I'm going to call them meat-eating storks. They will eat meat, and they're huge, and they're pretty scary-looking things. But we thought the evidence had historically was they were flightless, so they couldn't really be on one of these little sort of isolated islands. But then new research came out that no, they could fly, and they were able to go from these islands. So here's an interesting story. Those animals, those storks, come to this island where one of the reasons why you get dwarfism is because of reduced predator pressure. Suddenly, there is a unique new predator. The animals that they're, this is a novel experience of how will they react. And so that's the story that plays out. And then one of the other themes that's very much part of our series is about one of the powers of social mammals is parental investment, parental care, the determination of parents to protect these big investments of their, in this case, a little investment, but you know what I mean, a bit, relatively a huge investment. So the power of family is a big theme that runs through this. And so again, the denouement of the story is that playing out as the mother comes to protect her offspring. It's worth it, her risking herself against these pretty scary adversaries because of the value of her investment into her baby. So although none of what I've said is in the sequence and explicitly, but it's all in there in its DNA.
Well, you build a lot of tension. I mean, there's a lot of tension. I remember episode 1, it was the cave bear, and then the cave lions come in, and I'm like, oh, it's like, what's going to happen? And it is the drama. And do your experiences, because you did Planet Earth 2, Planet Earth 3, the other documentaries you've done, did those help shape some of these narratives as far as
Totally.
see what you see in the wild, and then you go, okay, and then we'll make this. Yeah.
Absolutely fundamental to the storytelling grammar. And that comes down to the photography, about where we put the camera. In a CGI world, you can tell any story you want, because you could just make it all up if you wanted to, but we don't. But and we're very restrained about what we do, and part of that comes from mirroring the things that I've seen, or we have seen in the real natural world. But also, it's really important about cameras, how you execute this, how you photograph this, because there's two things. One is, you want people to feel in the lives of these animals. You want the camera to help you tell their stories, give their perspective. But also, what you don't want for a second is someone to say, "Oh, this feels like a VFX show." You want them to feel like this is a observational natural history documentary. So again, with VFX cameras, theoretically, you can put a camera anywhere. So if a saber-tooth was jumping on the back of a mammoth, you could put a VFX camera right underneath it and spin it around it and fly over it and all this. And people do. I've seen other people, and that's nothing wrong with that. They can do that if they want. It's very exciting and dramatic, but it looks immediately like a VFX show. It looks like it's a reconstruct. Whereas we don't do that. We say, well, where would you put a camera if you were shooting that? Well, you can't go there because you'd get trampled or eaten, and that wouldn't happen. You'd never get close. It would be over before you get a camera there. We'd be back in a bush or in a truck, 200 meters away on a telephoto lens. So that's where we have to put the camera. And so you shoot it like that. But then you think, well, of course, when this is happening, it's only happening once. You can't say to the animal, stop, while we reposition the camera. So again, so you can't have hundreds of cameras cross-cutting. So how do you do that? Well, then you have to cut away to something. So you cut away to a drone shot, or you cut away to another, one of the animals watching. And then that allows you to then move your real camera in the real world to a different position, and in our world, our virtual camera to it. So when you edit that together, it looks like we filmed it for real. So you're not breaking that spell of, oh, how did they do that? It's more, wow, what's going on in this world? And I think that is that all comes, I think, from the experience that me and many of my colleagues who've worked with me on these classic blue chip natural history shows, making ourselves obsessively only operating in that way.
Well, it comes across. It does. It comes like, even when, when I first saw Prehistoric Planet, and I was like, okay, this is like a nature documentary on dinosaurs, and they went back 60 million years, or 65, 70 million years. Yeah. And now we've gone 800,000 years or 15,000 years in time, and you're there with a camera. It is so lifelike. What I also liked too was there's little snippets of live animals, right? Of real world animals. So, I remember the lemurs and the bellbird in New Zealand. I was like, okay, that's a bellbird, So was that kind of brings the realism?
We want to keep people on their toes. So they go, is that real? Is that, I don't actually. I don't want people to do that. But part of it is, and sometimes there are animals in the series which are both real and then CGI and then real again. Same animal, the animal in a scene can change from being something we filmed that existed running around in the environment, and then actually became a CG. We then made a CG version of it, and it runs around a bit more, and then it goes back to being a real animal. And it doesn't really matter at all. But we like it for people to go, can't tell the difference. So yeah. Actually,
there's times you can't. Yeah, there's times you can't tell the difference.
Just going back to what I was saying about that veracity thing, I should also mention that one of the joys of this project has been collaborating with John Favreau, from who's the Hollywood director, who has always been, who I've now collaborated on all three of these now. And of course, John brings a really interesting perspective, because he is a guru in VFX, but he's also completely obsessed with how we make wildlife documentaries. And that's how we met, really, comparing notes on he was doing The Lion King, and I was working on a show called Dynasties, and we had a lion episode, and he had seen that show and was using some of the grammar in his Lion King, and we got talking about how we do it. Anyway, he of all of us, he is the most insistent about that, just rowing back, just take the drama down a notch, take the photography down a notch, because nobody's ever going to say, well, that wasn't an exciting shot, or that wasn't an exciting moment. But they are going to say, if you get it wrong, well, that didn't look quite right. So he's been a very, very, very powerful voice in that veracity side of the story. In fact, actually, it's been quite interesting. I now give. He's the VFX guy. I'm the natural history guy. He now gives lots of natural history notes, and I give lots of VFX notes. So we kind of
it goes back.
Yeah. Kind of
it works. It works. It definitely
Yeah.
works. It definitely works. Yeah. There. So was there a sequence or I guess a jaw-dropping moment for you when it came to life and you were like, just whoa.
Yeah.
I wish I could have gone back in history and actually seen this.
Well, I know I would say this, but I genuinely believe this is true. You have an idea of what this might be like when you conceive it, and you write something on a paper, and you maybe do a bit of, art on the treatment and all the rest of it. What actually ended up happening is beyond my expectations. So kind of any sequence, and you mentioned the Gigantopithecus. I love the poignancy of that. You really feel inside his head. But I think one of the sequences that because we did some press yesterday, and we were showing some people some of the sequences. The opening sequence, with that moment where we say, the mother has the baby in this horrendous storm, and she's on her own. You think she's going to perish. We had to stop it at that point because we just, and all the press in the audience says, what happens? And I thought, well, that's it. They believe that they're totally in that animal's alive in their head. So that was very original. But then there's another sequence which is one of the last we did in the series, and I was actually on location when we were helping be one of the performance puppets things and all the rest of it, which we do as part of our approach, which is basically, we shot it in Norway, which is the woolly rhinos and the scimitar cats. And I just think as a story and as a piece of photography, storytelling, behavior, epic execution, I think it's extraordinary. And there isn't to my eyes, there is not a moment that it's faultless in terms of execution. There's not a moment you do not believe that those are all running around in that snow, and that poor, it's the story of one of the characters in it is a very old female. It's part of the story about how the value, even when they're old, animals in a herd have value because they've experienced. She's blind, and she gets isolated from the herd, and then picked off by the scimitar cats, and then I don't want to spoil it, but it ends happily.
Yeah.
That sequence. I just watched that again, and it's extraordinary. That would be one of the great sequences in a Planet Earth. If I was playing, if Planet Earth was going out on air tomorrow, and that sequence is in it, that would be one of the sequences that everybody would be talking about.
Yeah, phenomenal filmmaking, and I know I'm running out of time because I could talk to you all day about this show. Just really quick too, what I really enjoyed at the end, and I'm seeing this more, I guess, lately in some of the shows coming out, is like a 5-minute science section of, what is the Ice Age, what is the melt, the deserts. I found fascinating. Just really quickly, how important did you feel that was to this, to explain and educate a little bit on, why the Earth went through this period?
I think you could perfectly easily make these shows without those. I think they stand alone. I think they do have a deep learning element to them, as I said earlier. But again, fundamentally, we're filmmakers, but we're also educators. We all love telling people about, did you know this? And of course, sometimes people do say, well, how do you know that? And what is the story behind that? And so it's lovely to have the chance to extend the content into these into this other elements of the shows. So we have these I don't know what we call them, kind of science explainers at the end, and they have a number of roles. One of the roles actually was to answer one of the questions that people always ask is, how big were they? Because without a human being as a sort of measuring stick, it's very hard to judge sometimes how big these. And they were huge, massive. I stood next to a sort of a model of one out in Shanghai Museum. It was a short-faced bear. I was astonished, and I've been working on this for 3 years. Until we actually stand by one. So we do a little piece where we put, we imagine what would happen if these animals were walking around Bristol or London or somewhere today, and how big they would look and all the rest of it. So that's got a bit of fun. But then also some of the classics, some of the places that people may have heard of where they find fossils. We talk of stories about La Brea and some of those places. But also it does allow the academic community to also have a chance to express their stories, because obviously we're talking a lot about the filmmaking because that's what we end up on air, but this is all what we're seeing is the peak of a little pyramid or peak of a little iceberg, which of a huge base of thousands and thousands of people, not just all the CG artists and all this, but the massive scientific community, many of whom directly influenced and contributed to the show. But even those that we haven't literally phoned up, their work is in there. Our research team cast their net as wide as is possible. We have you've talked to him already. We have a wonderful lead scientist who he's kind of sits in the center of this web and has his fingers in all these pies and knows, and we get to hear things. One of the joys of this is we get to hear stories before anybody else does. So, often a scientist or somebody who's researching will say, well, look, I have found this story. I haven't published it yet, but it's the, and so we get, which is doubly exciting because it's new, but also it means that we don't then go down some line and then suddenly, put our show out on air. And then the next day somebody publishes, oh no, actually we've discovered that it had a 10-foot horn on its nose or something like that.
Yeah,
we didn't put in. That doesn't tend to happen. No. It's the nightmare that it could happen.
Yeah. Okay. Just I guess my final question is the end of, I think it was episode 6. Yeah. The humans. Is that giving some indication on where we might go with the next prehistoric planet? I don't know.
That's not the intention.
Yeah.
It could. We talked a lot about whether to include, we are Ice Age creatures. It's perfectly legitimate to have humans, modern humans in the shows. We decided not to for a whole load of reasons, but we also felt it would be in the same way as we could have, but we didn't put the meteor, the meteor landing in Prehistoric Planet Series 1 and 2 with the extinction effect. But we didn't, but we thought, well, actually, just a tiny little emblematic hint of this world was an extraordinary natural world where the numbers of creatures were astronomical. And yet that has changed in the last, that scene is probably, we didn't put a specific date on it, but let's say it's in the last 10 to 15,000 years. So just in one shot, 4 human beings walk into scene and they're carrying spears. We just thought that all that is saying is that moment is an emblem of what's going to now happen to all the things you've seen from the last 5 episodes. And that's it. We'll leave you there. Think about it.
Yeah.
But it's,
here
rather
we are.
than saying, but again, it's a note. Rather than a hit people between the eyes. But it's much better for people to draw their own conclusions and then maybe go on their own journey about what this all means. So yeah, it was fun. That I wanted to I wanted to dress up as one of those and be one of those characters, but unfortunately, it wasn't to be.
Well, it does leave you the sense of wonder, and you just have to appreciate nature and the planet we live on and the history of it, and the natural history is just phenomenal.
Exactly
right. From my co-host Angie, who again, she's in Florida. Thank you for making this. We've been begging for it literally for years. We have been begging for somebody to make this show, and you have made it. But Mike, congratulations. It is a phenomenal series. It airs on November 26th, Apple TV. Watch it. Everybody listening to this, watch it. You will love it. It's incredible. And if you haven't seen the Prehistoric 1 and 2 or the first 2 iterations, watch those, because this is something that you've just never seen before. So on behalf of my audience and the All Creatures podcast, Mike, thank you so much for spending the time with us today.
Chris, you're very welcome. It's been great fun. And just last thing to say is I sometimes have to pinch myself that somebody has allowed me to do this, because it is a great, great fun and privilege. So thank you for talking to me about it. It's great.
Yeah. Well done. Well done. Thank you.